Invisible Walls Noor Rahman adjusted the sleeve of her emerald green kurta for the fifth time, lingering in her car outside the brightly lit house. Music thumped through the open windows, mingling with laughter and excited voices. Inside, her friend Hania's graduation celebration was in full swing, but Noor couldn't bring herself to exit the safety of her vehicle. "Just an hour," she whispered to herself, checking her appearance once more in the rearview mirror. Smile, congratulate Hania, then leave. The rejection email from the prestigious photography agency she'd applied to still stung fresh after 3 days. 4 years of university and countless sleepless nights had culminated in a polite, "We regret to inform you," that made her question everything. Her phone buzzed with Hania's third message. "Where are you? Everyone's asking!" With a deep breath, Noor finally stepped out, clutching a carefully wrapped gift. The house was packed with familiar faces from university. Hania spotted her immediately, rushing over in a whirlwind of excitement and perfume. "You came! I was about to send a search party," she exclaimed, pulling Noor into a tight embrace. "Sorry, traffic was terrible," Noor lied, returning the hug with practiced enthusiasm. "Congratulations again. Your parents must be so proud. They're insufferable, actually," Hania laughed. "Dad keeps introducing me as my daughter, the future hospital administrator to everyone." "Come on, there's samosas and cake in the kitchen." Noor followed, nodding and smiling as classmates approached with congratulations and summer plans. Everyone seemed to have their lives mapped out: internships, job offers, graduate programs. Each conversation felt like a reminder of her own uncertainty, her smile growing more strained with each passing minute. After half an hour of performative socializing, Noor retreated to a quiet corner of the garden. She pulled out her phone, pretending to answer important messages, when the screen showed only her photography portfolio, the one deemed not quite what we're looking for by the agency. "You know, there's an art to looking busy to avoid conversation," came a voice beside her. "But your screen timeout keeps giving you away." Noor looked up to find Farid Mirza, Hania's cousin, who had moved back from abroad last month. She'd met him briefly at family gatherings, but knew little beyond his reputation as the quiet, bookish one in Hania's family. "I wasn't avoiding," she began automatically. "You've checked the time 7 times in 2 minutes," he interrupted gently. "And you've been holding that same glass of mango juice since you arrived." Something about his direct but kind observation made her usual defenses falter. "Is my discomfort that obvious?" "Only to someone who's looking," Farid replied, sitting on the bench beside her. Unlike most of the guests dressed in flashy clothes, he wore a simple navy kurta that somehow looked both casual and elegant. "These parties aren't really my scene either." "Then why come?" Noor asked, genuinely curious. "Family obligation. And Hania threatened to tell embarrassing childhood stories if I didn't show up." His smile was warm, reaching his eyes in a way that suggested it was genuine. "Your excuse?" "Same, well, minus the blackmail. Hania's been my best friend since childhood. I couldn't miss her graduation." They fell into a surprisingly comfortable silence, watching the celebration from a distance. For the first time that evening, Noor felt the knot in her chest loosen slightly. "You're a photographer, right?" Farid asked eventually. "Hania showed me some of your work when I first moved back. The series about older craftspeople in the old city was remarkable." Noor blinked in surprise. "That was just a university project. Nothing special." "I disagree," he said simply. "Your portraits captured something beyond just their faces. There was dignity in how you showed their hands, their tools. It felt respectful." The unexpected compliment caught her off guard. Not the usual "so pretty," or "what camera do you use," but a genuine observation about her artistic intention. "Thank you," she said quietly, though apparently it wasn't enough to impress Jasper and Associates. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Farid tilted his head questioningly. "It's a photography agency I applied to. Got rejected this week." Noor surprised herself by admitting it aloud. 4 years of education, and I'm back where I started." "At the beginning of something new," Farid corrected, his voice gentle but firm. "Not where you started." Before Noor could respond, Hania's voice called out from across the garden. There you are! Noor, come take photos of the cake cutting! Fareed, stop being antisocial and join the party. With an apologetic smile, Noor stood up. Duty calls. Fareed nodded understandingly. Sometimes the view from the sidelines offers more clarity anyway. As Noor walked back toward the noise and lights, camera in hand, she found herself glancing back at Fareed. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not for the confident facade she presented, but for the uncertainty she'd been desperately trying to hide. Quiet conversations. 2 weeks after Hania's graduation party, Noor found herself sitting across from Fareed at a quiet cafe tucked away in the corner of the city's arts district. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across their table. It wasn't a planned meeting. She had come to photograph the historic architecture when she spotted him absorbed in a book at the window seat. "I'm not stalking you. I promise," she'd said awkwardly, clutching her camera. "This place has amazing light for photography." Fareed had smiled, closing his book. "Something about architectural history." "I know. That's partly why I come here. The other reason is their cardamom tea." He gestured to the empty chair. "Would you like to join me? Unless you're in the middle of a project." Now, an hour later, her untouched notebook sat beside an empty teacup as they talked about everything from classic films to the city's changing skyline. It was the most genuine conversation Noor had experienced in months. "So what are you doing with your photography now?" Fareed asked, watching as she absently adjusted the aperture on her camera. Noor's fingers stilled. "Mostly small freelance jobs. Product photography for local businesses, occasional family portraits. Nothing exciting. And your personal work? The kind that made me notice your talent at the party?" She looked away, uncomfortable with both the compliment and the question. "On hold, I guess. Need to pay bills first." Fareed nodded, understanding in his eyes. "What would you shoot if money wasn't a concern?" "The disappearing neighborhoods," she answered without hesitation. "There's this whole section of the old city being demolished for luxury apartments. Families who've lived there for generations are being displaced. Their stories deserve documentation before everything's erased." "That sounds meaningful. Why haven't you started?" "Because meaningful doesn't pay rent," Noor replied with a bitter laugh. "And because," she hesitated, "what if I pour my heart into it and no one cares? What if it's just another rejected portfolio?" Fareed considered this, turning his teacup slowly. "My grandmother had this saying, 'The bird doesn't sing because it has an answer. It sings because it has a song.'" He smiled at her confused expression. "Your work doesn't need external validation to matter. Nor. Easy to say when you're not the one with parents asking when you'll get a real job," she countered, though without hostility. "Actually," he said with unexpected humor, "as the family disappointment who left engineering to become an urban planner focused on historic preservation, I might understand better than you think." Their laughter broke the tension, and before Noor realized it, afternoon had faded into evening. As they prepared to leave, Fareed hesitated by the door. "There's an urban development hearing next Thursday about the old district. I'm presenting some preservation arguments." He seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "If you're interested, it might connect with your photography ideas." "No pressure, of course." Noor surprised herself by agreeing immediately. "Text me the details?" That night, for the first time in weeks, she pulled out her professional camera instead of scrolling through job listings. Something about Fareed's quiet confidence had rekindled a spark she thought had been extinguished. She began photographing the view from her apartment window, not with the technical precision she'd been taught in school, but with the emotional resonance that had drawn her to photography in the first place. Their meetings became a regular occurrence after the hearing, where Noor had been captivated by Fareed's passionate defense of the city's architectural heritage. They'd established themselves in different cafes each week, Fareed with his urban planning documents and Noor with her camera and laptop. They worked separately but together, occasionally sharing observations or asking for feedback. One rainy afternoon, as Noor scrolled through her recent photographs with growing frustration, Fareed glanced over. "What's wrong?" "These are technically perfect and emotionally dead," she admitted. "I'm so focused on getting everything right that I've lost whatever made my university work special." Fareed considered this. "Come with me," he said suddenly, packing his things. "I want to show you something." Despite the downpour, he led her to an overlooked corner of the city where an elderly carpenter named Ibrahim had maintained his workshop for 50 years. The small space was warm with the smell of wood and generations of craftsmanship. "My young friend," Ibrahim greeted Farid warmly. "And you've brought a guest." As Farid explained Noor's photography to the old craftsman, Ibrahim's weathered face lit up. "Pictures? Of an old man like me? What for?" "Because your hands tell stories that words can't," Noor found herself saying, noticing the intricate calluses and scars that mapped a lifetime of creating beautiful things. For the next 2 hours, she photographed Ibrahim working, forgetting about perfect composition and focusing instead on capturing the relationship between the man and his craft. When she finally reviewed the images that evening, she saw something she'd been missing: authenticity. "Thank you," she texted Farid later. "I think I found my voice again today." His reply came quickly. "It was always there. You just needed to stop listening to the noise drowning it out." That night, Noor created a new portfolio website, different from the polished commercial one she'd sent to agencies. This one she titled simply, "Voices of the City." The first entry featured Ibrahim's hands shaping wood into something beautiful, something that would outlast him. For the first time since her rejection letter, Noor fell asleep with a sense of purpose rather than dread. She didn't notice that her phone had buzzed with another message from Farid. "Your photography matters, Noor. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, especially yourself." Developing clarity. Beta, when will you apply for that government position I told you about? Salma's daughter just started there. Excellent benefits. Pension plan. Noor's mother adjusted her dupatta as she spoke, her casual tone belying the weight of her expectations. Sunday family lunch had become an exercise in deflection for Noor. 3 months had passed since Hania's graduation party, and while her photography was flourishing creatively, her parents remained unconvinced of its viability as a career. "I'm actually quite busy with freelance projects right now." "Ami," Noor replied, carefully arranging biryani on her plate. This wasn't entirely untrue. Her Voices of the City project had attracted attention from a local cultural magazine, resulting in a small commissioned piece. "Freelance means temporary," her father interjected from behind his newspaper. "Temporary isn't stability." Noor caught her younger brother Daniel's sympathetic glance across the table. At 16, he understood the pressure of parental expectations all too well, his own dreams of becoming a musician similarly dismissed as impractical. "Actually," Noor began hesitantly, "I've been documenting the craftspeople in the old district. A magazine published my photo essay last week." She pulled out her phone to show them. Her mother glanced at the screen without taking it. "Very nice hobby, Beta. But hobbies don't provide health insurance." The familiar dismissal stung, but less sharply than before. Lately, Noor had begun measuring her worth beyond her parents' approval. A subtle but significant shift she attributed partly to Farid's unwavering belief in her vision. Speaking of Farid, her phone buzzed with his message. "Coffee at Barzak Books at 3? Found something you might want to photograph." "I need to go," Noor announced, rising from the table earlier than family custom typically allowed. "I have an appointment for a potential project." Her mother looked startled. "On Sunday? What kind of professional schedules meetings on family day?" "The kind who values my work enough to pay for it," Noor replied with newfound confidence, kissing her mother's cheek before she could respond. Barzak Books was a converted colonial-era building with creaking wooden floors and towering bookshelves. Farid waited in the poetry section, a leather portfolio under his arm and excitement evident in his usually composed demeanor. "What's so urgent?" Noor asked, curiosity overtaking her lingering frustration from lunch. "2 things," Farid said, leading her to a quiet reading nook. First, the Historical Society approved a small grant for documenting the old district before redevelopment. "They need a photographer." He slid a formal letter across the table. Noor scanned the document, her heart racing. The grant wasn't large, but it would fund her project legitimately for 6 months. "How did they even know about my work?" Farid looked slightly embarrassed. I might have shown the committee head your website, but they made the decision based solely on your talent. And the second thing? He opened the portfolio, revealing architectural sketches of a small storefront. The Cultural Center is converting this space into a community gallery. They're accepting exhibition proposals for their inaugural season. Noor stared at the drawings, possibilities unfolding in her mind. You think I should submit my project? I think your work deserves to be seen by more than just website visitors, Farid said simply. The deadline's next month. Over the following weeks, Noor threw herself into her documentation project with renewed purpose. The Historical Society grant provided legitimacy that opened doors previously closed to her. Elderly weavers invited her into workshops that had been in their families for generations. Shop owners shared photographs from decades past. A 78-year-old henna artist named Janat allowed Noor to photograph her intricate designs and record the stories behind traditional patterns being forgotten in the rush toward modernization. Through it all, Farid remained a steadfast presence, sometimes accompanying her on photo walks, sometimes meeting afterward to review her selections, always offering perspective without imposing his vision on hers. One evening, as they sorted through images in Farid's apartment, Hania dropped by unexpectedly. Well, isn't this cozy? She remarked, eyeing the comfortable domesticity of their workflow spread across Farid's living room floor. When you said you were busy with a project, Noor, I didn't realize my cousin was part of it. Farid's been helping me prepare my exhibition proposal, Noor explained, missing the insinuation in her friend's tone. Is that what we're calling it? Hania raised an eyebrow, helping herself to tea from the kitchen with the familiarity of family. You've been practically inseparable for months. I hardly see either of you anymore. Farid caught Noor's discomfort and intervened smoothly. You should join us for the Cultural Center's Heritage Walk next weekend. Noor's documenting it, and I'm providing historical context for the architecture. Hania's interest seemed genuine as they showed her some of Noor's recent photographs. But when Farid stepped away to answer a phone call, she leaned closer to Noor. Just be careful, she whispered. Farid gets intensely focused on projects and people, but once he's solved the puzzle, his interest wanes. I've seen it happen before. The comment lingered with Noor long after they'd finished for the evening. On her way home, she wondered if that's all she was to Farid, a project, a problem to solve. The thought was more painful than she wanted to admit. Her phone chimed with a message as she entered her apartment. Your selection for the final portfolio is perfect. The committee would be blind not to accept it. Farid Noor stared at the screen, conflicted emotions swirling within her. For the first time in months, her path forward seemed to be taking shape, but she hadn't anticipated how complicated the journey would become, or how intertwined her professional confidence would be with her feelings for the quiet man who had first seen beyond her carefully constructed facade. Focus adjustments. The gallery committee's acceptance email arrived on a Tuesday morning as Noor was photographing a spice merchant's shop, its interior a kaleidoscope of colors and aromas. Her hands trembled so badly that she had to set down her camera. Good news? Asked the elderly merchant, Zahid, who had become one of her regular subjects. They want to exhibit my work, Noor managed, still staring at her phone in disbelief. The Cultural Center's opening exhibition, they chose my project. Zahid's weathered face creased with genuine pleasure. Of course they did. You see with your heart, not just your eyes. That's rare these days. She photographed his hands as he measured out cardamom and cinnamon, hands that had performed the same graceful movements for over 50 years, and thought about how much had changed in the 6 months since Hania's graduation party. The rejection that had once devastated her now seemed like a necessary redirection rather than a failure. Her first instinct was to call Farid, but she hesitated, Hania's warning echoing in her mind. Their relationship had grown increasingly complicated as her exhibition preparation intensified. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, something beyond professional admiration but carefully restrained. Instead, she texted Hania, "They accepted my exhibition proposal. Celebrating tonight?" Hania's reply came quickly. "Amazing! Dinner at my place." 7 p.m. I'm cooking. Noor arrived at Hania's apartment bearing flowers and sweets, only to find Farid already there, helping his cousin in the kitchen. Their easy familial banter made Noor acutely aware of her status as an outsider to their shared history. "Congratulations," Farid said warmly, abandoning his cooking duties to embrace her. "I knew they'd recognize your talent." "We both did," Hania interjected, pulling Noor away to pour her a glass of celebration juice. "Though Farid hasn't talked about anything else for weeks. It's becoming tiresome, honestly. Dinner was delicious but tense, with Hania making increasingly pointed remarks about Noor's sudden professional success. "It's incredible how quickly things have changed for you," she commented while serving dessert. "6 months ago, you were devastated about that agency rejection, and now you're going to be featured in the Cultural Center's inaugural exhibition. Some people spend years trying to get that kind of opportunity." "It's not like I didn't work for it," Noor replied carefully, "and the Historical Society grant was based solely on my portfolio." "Of course," Hania smiled too brightly. "Having connections on the committee wouldn't hurt, though." Farid set down his fork. "Noor earned this entirely on her own merit, Hania." "I'm just saying," Hania continued, "your advocacy probably didn't hurt." The implication hung heavily in the air. Noor excused herself to the balcony, needing space from the suffocating tension. Moments later, Farid joined her, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry about Hania. She's under pressure at her new job and taking it out on everyone." "Is she right?" Noor asked directly. "Did I get this opportunity because of you?" "No," Farid answered without hesitation. "I showed your work to people who could appreciate it, but the decision was based entirely on your talent. I would never undermine your accomplishments that way. And this, us working together, what is it exactly?" The question had been building for months, and now, bolstered by both success and doubt, Noor found the courage to ask it. Farid leaned against the railing, considering his answer carefully. "It started as recognition of something special in your perspective, both as a photographer and as a person. It became," he hesitated, "something I value more than I expected to. Hania says you lose interest once you've solved a person." Pain flashed across his face. "Hania remembers who I was, not who I am. I used to keep people at a distance, analyzing rather than connecting. But that changed when I moved back." He looked at her directly. "You changed it." Before Noor could respond, Hania called them back inside, the moment of clarity slipping away. The following weeks became a whirlwind of preparation for the exhibition. Noor worked with a curator to select and arrange her photographs, wrote artist statements, and finalized printing specifications. The experience was exhilarating but overwhelming, leaving little time for anything else, including the confused emotions surrounding Farid. 3 days before the opening, disaster struck. The printing company mixed up her order, delivering incorrectly sized prints that couldn't be used in the exhibition frames. With no time to reprint through official channels, Noor faced the potential collapse of everything she'd worked for. Desperate, she called the one person who always seemed to have solutions. "I need help," she admitted when Farid answered. "Everything's falling apart." Within hours, Farid had mobilized resources she didn't know existed. A friend with a professional-grade printer, another with matting equipment, even his quiet apartment transformed into an emergency production studio. They worked through the night, Noor making last-minute adjustments to images while Farid handled the physical production with meticulous precision. At dawn, exhausted but triumphant, they surveyed the completed prints spread across his living room floor. The images were powerful, honest portraits of the old district's residents alongside architectural details that told their stories without a single written word. "They're better than the originals," Noor admitted, slumping against the sofa in exhaustion. "You did this," Farid said, his voice rough with fatigue but filled with unmistakable pride. "All of it." "Not without you," she countered, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the truth. "Not just the practical help, but—" She struggled to articulate it. "You saw me when I couldn't see myself. You recognized something in my work when I was ready to abandon it." In the gentle morning light, With her most vulnerable work surrounding them and the barriers of professionalism temporarily lowered by exhaustion, Noor finally saw what had been developing between them all along, something deeper than mentorship or friendship, something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Farid's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. "The gallery coordinator," he said after checking the message. "They need the final prints by noon." Reality reasserted itself as they carefully packed the photographs for transport. Whatever realization had dawned would have to wait until after the exhibition. Some things, Noor was learning, required perfect timing to develop properly. The full picture. The cultural center hummed with conversation as guests moved from photograph to photograph, wine glasses and program booklets in hand. Noor stood near the entrance, a vision in deep burgundy, greeting visitors with a confidence she was still learning to inhabit. Her exhibition, Echoes in Stone and Skin, Voices of the Old District, had drawn a larger crowd than anyone anticipated, including representatives from several prominent galleries and publications. "Ms. Rahman, your work is extraordinary." An elegantly dressed woman introduced herself as the editor of a national arts magazine. "We'd love to feature you in our Emerging Voices series. Your perspective on urban heritage is refreshingly human-centered." Noor accepted the editor's card with steady hands, a stark contrast to the nervous young woman who had once hidden behind her phone at a graduation party. 6 months of documenting overlooked lives and spaces had transformed her, not just professionally but personally. Her parents stood near her centerpiece photograph, an image of Janat, the henna artist, her hands painted with the same designs she had created for brides across generations. For the first time, Noor saw genuine understanding in her father's expression as he read the accompanying text. "You've made something important here, Beta," he said quietly when she approached. "Not just pretty pictures, but history, memory." Her mother squeezed her hand, uncharacteristically emotional. "I was wrong to push you toward something safer. This," she gestured around the gallery, "this is what you were meant to create." The validation Noor had craved for years now felt like a beautiful but unnecessary addition to the confidence she'd already built within herself. She hugged them both, grateful for their presence, but no longer dependent on their approval. As the evening progressed, Noor searched the growing crowd for one particular face. Hania had arrived early, effusive with congratulations that finally seemed genuine, but Farid was conspicuously absent. "He said he had some emergency at work," Hania explained with a sympathetic shrug. "Something about a preservation appeal." Disappointment settled heavily in Noor's chest. After everything they'd shared, the late nights preparing, the conversations that shaped her vision, the silent understanding that had grown between them, his absence left an unexpected void. She moved through the exhibition on autopilot, accepting congratulations and answering questions while constantly glancing toward the entrance. 2 hours into the evening, as she explained her photographic process to a group of university students, she felt a shift in the room's energy. Farid stood in the doorway, slightly disheveled and out of breath, as though he'd run the entire way. Their eyes met across the crowded gallery, and without excusing herself, Noor moved toward him, drawn by some invisible force that made everyone else in the room momentarily fade from awareness. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said when she reached him. "The Preservation Board needed emergency documentation for the eastern section of the district. A developer tried to begin demolition without proper approvals. Did you stop them?" He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had first cracked her defenses months ago. "Temporarily, yes. But I brought you something more important." From his messenger bag, he withdrew a small, carefully wrapped package. "Open it later when you're alone." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the Cultural Center's director announcing the closing remarks and official toast to the exhibition's success. Noor was called forward to speak, the package tucked securely against her side. Standing before the crowd, Noor found herself momentarily overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this point. She spoke eloquently about the importance of preserving not just buildings, but the human stories they contained, about seeing value in what society often overlooked. As she concluded, her gaze found Farid at the back of the room. "Sometimes transformation comes not from changing who we are," she said, "but from someone helping us see what was already there, the strength, the vision, the voice we'd forgotten we possessed." Later, after the final guests had departed and the gallery staff began closing for the night, Noor sat alone on a bench facing her favorite photograph, an image of Ibrahim the carpenter's workshop, sunlight streaming through dust motes to illuminate his weathered hands, creating beauty from raw materials. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Finally, she unwrapped Farid's gift, a small handcrafted wooden box with intricate carving. Inside lay a vintage camera lens, clearly antique but in perfect condition. Beneath it, a note in Farid's precise handwriting, "For seeing what others miss. This belonged to my grandfather, who documented the city's transformation half a century ago. He would have wanted you to continue the story." Tears blurred her vision as she traced the lens's metal housing. The gift was more than an object. It was recognition of her place in a continuum of witnesses, those who preserved moments others deemed insignificant. "Do you like it?" Noor looked up to find Farid standing nearby, hands in his pockets, uncharacteristically uncertain. "It's perfect," she answered, making space for him beside her. "But why weren't you here earlier, really?" He sat down, closer than professional distance would dictate, but not quite close enough for what they'd both been circling for months. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of overshadowing your moment. Afraid of being just another person taking credit for your brilliance. Afraid of—" He paused. "Complicating what we have." "And what is that exactly?" Noor asked, her heart beating rapidly beneath her composed exterior. "Something I've never experienced before," Farid answered honestly. "Something that started with recognition and became everything." He gestured toward the photographs surrounding them. "You see the world in ways that continually astonish me. Your perspective changes how I see everything." "You were the first person who really saw me," Noor said softly. "Not who I was pretending to be, but who I actually was. That night at Hania's party, when everyone else saw a smiling face checking her phone, you saw someone struggling to remember her own worth." "I recognized something familiar," he admitted. "The same masks I'd worn myself." In the quiet gallery, surrounded by images that testified to her unique vision, Noor finally allowed herself to see the full picture that had been developing between them. Not mentor and student, not just friends or colleagues, but two people who had recognized something essential in each other from the very beginning. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture more intimate than any embrace. "I don't want to pretend anymore about what I want, who I am, or how I feel about you." "Neither do I," Farid replied, his voice steady but vulnerable. "I've spent too much of my life observing from a distance. With you, I want to be fully present in the frame." As they sat together in the dimmed gallery, Noor realized that what had begun as a reluctant appearance at a party had become the beginning of two parallel journeys, her rediscovery of her artistic voice and her heart's recognition of someone who truly saw her, completely and without judgment. Like the best photographs, their story had developed slowly, requiring the right elements, precise timing, and careful attention to detail. But the result, this moment of perfect clarity, had been worth every second of exposure.